They called her the ghost Angel of Saigon, the most decorated female medical evacuation pilot in Vietnam. But to the people of Riverwood, Montana, Catherine Winters was just a kind and elderly librarian who lived in the old colonial house on Maple Street. For months, the Los Zetas cartel had been terrorizing their small Montana town, thinking they owned these streets until they made the biggest mistake of their lives when Victor Reyes and his men burned the American flag outside. Cats honed the same flag that had flown over countless rescue missions in Vietnam. They thought they were just intimidating another helpless old woman. What the ruthless cartel lieutenant didn't know was that this quiet 75-year-old was about to make one phone call that would summon an army of over 300 combat veterans who owed her their lives. In 24 hours, Riverwood would become the battleground for an extraordinary story of redemption, where a cartel's worst act of disrespect would lead to their most profound transformation. Let's take a quick break. Tell us where you're tuning in from if this kind of content speaks to you. Don't forget to subscribe, because tomorrow's story is something truly special. The morning sun casts long shadows across Riverwood's Maple Street as Catherine Winters moved with practiced precision through her daily ritual, her weathered hands still steady. After all these years, carefully attached the American flag to the pole outside her colonial home. The flag itself had seen better days, its edges slightly frayed from years of service, but to Kat it remained as pristine as the day it was presented to her. Rose McCarthy watched from her diner across the street, absently wiping the same spot on her counter. Coffee's getting cold, Kat, she called out, her voice carrying a warmth that belied her growing concern about recent changes in their town. Kat secured the final knot with military precision before turning toward the diner. Some things can't be rushed, Rose. Some things need to be done right. Her voice was gentle, but carried an undertone of steel that few in town had ever noticed. Inside McCarthy's diner, Hannah Mitchell nursed her cooling coffee, her deputy chief's badge catching the morning light. Her eyes tracked 3 black SUVs as they rolled past Kat's house, their tinted windows hiding their occupants, but not their menace. Fourth time this week, Hannah muttered as Kat entered the diner. They're getting bolder. Kat settled onto her usual stool, her movements carrying the same precision she'd shown with the flag. Rose placed a fresh cup of coffee before her, hands trembling slightly. They were in here yesterday afternoon. Kat, 6 of them. Scared my customers half to death. Trouble? Kat asked, though her tone suggested she already knew the answer. Rose hesitated, glancing toward the window. Their leader, the one they call Viper. He made it clear they'd be expecting special treatment from now on. Said it was for protection. The last word came out bitter and scared. The bell above the diner's door chimed as General Thomas Steele entered, his uniform crisp despite the early hour. He nodded to each woman in turn before settling next to Kat. Morning, ladies. Suppose you've heard about the Martinez place. Kat wrapped her hands around her coffee cup. Carlos mentioned something yesterday. Vandalism. That's putting it mildly. Hannah sighed, accepting a coffee refill from Rose. Broke every window in his store, left one of their calling cards a snake carved into his door. Third business this month. First it was the pharmacy, Rose added quietly, then Kelly's gas station. Now this. Thomas's jaw tightened. They're smart, never enough evidence to make charges stick, and folks are too scared to testify anyway. Studied her reflection in the coffee's dark surface. Fear is a funny thing. Thomas makes people forget who they are, what they're capable of. Speaking from experience, Hannah asked, though her tone suggested she already knew the answer. Kat's eyes took on a distant look, seeing something far beyond the diner's walls. Back in 68 had a young lieutenant in my unit, green as spring grass, scared of his own shadow. VC had us pinned down outside Saigon. Worst firefight I'd seen. That lieutenant, he found something inside himself that day, something stronger than fear. What happened to him? Rose asked softly. A slight smile crossed Kat's face. Last I heard, he was commanding a special forces training facility. Fear didn't define him. His response to it did. The rumble of engines grew louder outside through the window. They watched as 2 black SUVs parked directly in front of Kat's house. Victor Viper Reyes stepped out, his expensive Suited at odds with the small town setting, he deliberately kicked over Kat's garden gnome, a gift from local. "Children better clean that up, Abua," he called out, his voice carrying through the diner windows. "Wouldn't want anyone to trip and hurt themselves." Kat continued sipping her coffee, seemingly unperturbed by the display of intimidation, but Hannah noticed how her knuckles had whitened around the cup. "They're pushing Thomas," said quietly, testing boundaries, seeing who will break first. "That how you see it, Chief?" Kat's voice remained steady. Hannah met her gaze. "How do you see it, Kat?" "I see men who mistake cruelty for strength, who think fear equals respect." Kat stood slowly, leaving money for her coffee. "Learned a long time ago, men like that don't stop pushing until they hit something solid." As Kat walked toward the door, Rose called after her, "Kat, what are you going to do?" She paused, her hand on the door handle. "Same thing I do every morning, Rose. Tend my garden, raise my flag. Remember who I am." She looked back at them, and for just a moment they saw something in her eyes, not anger, but the kind of quiet resolve that moved mountains. "Question is, when the time comes, will this town remember who it is?" The door closed behind her with a gentle chime. They watched through the window as Kat crossed the street, walking past the sneering cartel members without acknowledgement. She began picking up her fallen garden gnome, her movements unhurried but purposeful. "Sometimes I forget," Rose said softly, "what she used to be before she was just Kat the librarian." Hannah's face was grim. "Way things are going, we might all be reminded soon enough." Outside, the morning sun climbed higher over Riverwood, its light catching the stars and stripes that still flew proudly above Kat's home. The flag moved gently in the Montana breeze, its shadow falling across the street like a line drawn in the sand, a boundary that once crossed would change everything. Victor Reyes sat astride his black Mercedes SUV, watching Kat's colonial house through designer sunglasses. The morning sun glinted off his platinum watch and the snake-shaped ring on his right hand. Behind him, 4 cartel soldiers waited in their vehicles, engines idling with predatory patience. The old woman was still inside, visible through the front window as she organized books for her afternoon reading program with local children. A small American flag pin adorned her cardigan, another one of her endless patriotic displays that had begun to grate on Victor's nerves. "She's either stupid or brave," Adrian Rodriguez muttered from the passenger seat, rolling an unlit cigarette between his fingers. "Everyone else in town's falling in line, but she acts like we don't even exist." Victor's Italian leather jacket creaked as he shifted. "Don't much care which time. We had a chat with our friendly neighborhood librarian inside McCarthy's diner." Rose's hand trembled as she reached for the phone. Hannah Mitchell stopped her with a gentle touch. "Don't," the deputy chief whispered. "Kat knows what she's doing." The cartel members spread out as Victor approached Kat's front porch, their movements carrying the casual menace of circling wolves. Through the window, they could see Kat calmly placing books into her bag, seemingly oblivious to their presence. "Nice morning for reading stories, Abua," Victor called out, his voice carrying mock politeness. Kat emerged from her house library bag over her shoulder, her movements unhurried. "Every morning's nice when you're helping children learn," she replied, her eyes focused on locking her front door rather than on the men surrounding her. Victor stepped closer, using his height to loom over her. "That's actually what I wanted to discuss. See, some folks in town, they've learned their lesson. They understand how things work now. But you," he reached out, touching the flag pin on her cardigan, "you seem confused about the natural order of things." Kat's eyes moved from his hand to his face, and something in her gaze made Victor take an unconscious step backward. "Natural order is a funny thing. Son, nature's got a way of surprising folks who think they understand it." Adrian moved forward, his hand instinctively reaching inside his jacket, but Victor held up a staying hand. His smile was cold as winter steel. "Strong words for someone your age. Living on borrowed time times a gift," Kat replied, beginning to walk past them toward the library. "What matters is how you use it." Victor's hand shot out, gripping her arm. "Nobody walks away from me, old woman." What happened next occurred so quickly that Adrian would later have trouble describing it. One moment Victor held Kat's arm, the next he was stumbling backward, his wrist twisted at an awkward Cat stood exactly where she had been, her posture unchanged, as if nothing had happened. "Son," she said quietly, "there are two kinds of people in this world. Those who know when they're outmatched, and those who have to learn the hard way." Her eyes swept over the cartel members' question is, "Which kind are you?" Adrian watched in stunned silence. As Kat walked away, her pace unhurried, her library bag still neatly arranged on her shoulder. Victor rubbed his wrist, rage building in his eyes. "Boss," Adrian started. "Maybe we should shut up." Victor's voice cracked like a whip. "Tonight we show this town what happens to people who don't show proper respect, starting with that damn flag she loves so much." Inside the library, Kat began setting up for the children's reading program, her movements as precise as ever. But those who knew her well might have noticed how she positioned herself to keep the entrance in view, how she chose a seat that offered clear sight lines to all approaches. Hannah Mitchell entered, concern evident on her face, words spreading about what happened. "Victor's not the type to let this go." "No," Kat agreed, arranging storybooks in a neat circle. "Men like that never. Our pride won't let them." "I could post officers know." Kat's voice was gentle but firm. "Sometimes the best defense isn't the most obvious one." Hannah studied the older woman, seeing something shift beneath her calm exterior. "You're planning something." "Planning?" Kat's smile carried decades of secrets, just remembering there was a night in '68. Outside Saigon, our unit was surrounded, outgunned. Everyone said we were finished. She straightened a book spine with military precision. "Sometimes victory isn't about who has the most guns, it's about who has the strongest network." As afternoon faded into evening, Adrian Rodriguez sat in his car across from the library, watching Kat lock up for the day. His hand kept returning to the rosary his grandmother had given him, fingers whirring the beads as he remembered her words about choosing the right path. Through his earpiece, he could hear Victor coordinating tonight's action. They would send a message making example. But as Adrian watched Kat walk home, straight-backed and dignified despite the weight of threats around her, he couldn't shake the feeling that they were missing something crucial. The sun began to set over Riverwood, painting the sky in shades of blood and gold. Kat's flag moved gently in the evening breeze, still flying proudly despite the shadow of violence gathering around it. In McCarthy's diner, Rose watched Kat's house through worried eyes, her hands clutching a phone she knew she wouldn't use. "Lord," she whispered, "what are you planning?" Kat across town, in a secluded workshop. Kat opened an old footlocker she hadn't touched in years. Inside, beneath carefully preserved photographs of young Sodders, ERS, and jungle fatigues, lay a satellite phone and a worn notebook. Her fingers traced a familiar number, one she'd memorized decades ago, but never thought she'd need to use again. "Some debt," she murmured to the empty room, "never expire." The night deepened over Riverwood as cartel vehicles began moving into position, their headlights off, their movements carrying deadly purpose. But in her quiet house, Kat Winter sat calmly at her desk, the satellite phone before her, waiting for the moment when past and present would collide, when those who dealt in fear would learn about a different kind of strength, one forged in the crucible of war and tempered by decades of quiet service. The stage was set, the pieces were in motion, and somewhere in the darkness a match was being struck that would ignite far more than just a flag. Telling and preparing this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Darkness settled over Riverwood like a heavy blanket, broken only by scattered streetlights and the neon glow from McCarthy's. She'd saved the flag that now flew outside her house, was clearly visible in the photo draped over the helicopter. Side, her fingers traced the faces in the photograph, just like old times. She murmured, waiting for the enemy to make their move. Through her window, she could see 3 black SUVs gathering at the far end of Maple Street. Victor Reyes stood beneath a street light, smoke from his cigarette curling around him like a snake's coil. More vehicles were arriving, their headlights off, engines nearly silent. Inside McCarthy's diner, Rose turned the sign to close, her hands shaking slightly. Hannah Mitchell stood beside her, watching the gathering cartel members through the blinds. "Shouldn't we do something?" Rose whispered. Hannah's hand rested on her service weapon. Kat said to wait, said Timing was everything. The night air carried the sound of boots on pavement as Victor's men moved into position. Adrian Rodriguez hung back his grandmother's rosary beads, clicking softly between his fingers. Something about the old woman's calm throughout the day had set him on edge. Remember, Victor addressed his men, his voice carrying in the still night air were teaching a lesson about respect, about consequences. He held up a gasoline can moonlight glinting off his snake ring. Kat watched them approach her house, her expression unchanged. She opened her desk drawer, removing a satellite phone and a worn notebook. A familiar number was written on the first page. The ink faded, but still legible. The memory hit her with sudden clarity. Saigon, 1968. Her helicopter surrounded by enemy fire. A platoon of wounded soldiers waiting for extraction. Everyone said it was suicide to attempt the rescue, but she'd made a call then too, and help had come. Victor's voice cut through her memories. Bring her out. Let her watch this. Cat rose slowly, moving to her front door with measured steps. Outside, cartel members had formed a loose semicircle around her flagpole. Victor stood at its center, gasoline can in hand. Last chance. Abella, he called out. Kneel and apologize for disrespecting me this morning, and maybe we just take the flag instead of burning it. Cat emerged onto her porch, her posture straight, hands clasped calmly before her. The sight of her composure in the face of such threat made several cartel members shift uneasily. Son, her voice carried clearly. Despite its softness, you're about to make the kind of mistake that changes lives. Victor laughed, but there was a nervous edge to it. Look around, old woman, you're alone. No one's coming to help you. That's where you're wrong, boy. Something shifted in Kat's stance, a subtle transformation that Adrian noticed, even if he couldn't name it. The quiet librarian seemed to fade, replaced by something harder, something forged in combat. See, there's something you need to understand about old soldiers. As if on cue, a distant rumble began to build, not the growl of cartel vehicles, but something deeper, more organized. Victor's head snapped toward the sound, the gasoline can freezing halfway to the flag. We never fight alone. Cat continued, her words carrying the weight of absolute truth. And we never forget our debts. The rumble grew louder, and now emergency lights began flashing at the end of Maple Street. But they weren't just local responders. Military stickers marked many of the approaching vehicles. What the hell is this? One of Victor's men demanded, backing toward his SUV. This. Cat's smile hadn't wavered. This is just the advance guard, the Real Army. Still 10 hours out. More vehicles were arriving by the minute, their occupants moving with military precision. These weren't weekend warriors or local militia. These were combat veterans who moved like they'd never left the service. Adrian watched in growing awe as the cartel's advantage evaporated where moments ago they had surrounded one old woman. Now they found themselves facing an organized force that moved with practiced coordination. Victor's facade of control cracked slightly. You're bluffing. No way you could. One phone call. Cat cut him off. That's all it took. One call to remind my brothers that the flag you're about to burn, it's not just my flag, it belongs to all of us. The gasoline can slip from Victor's fingers as more veterans emerged from vehicles. Their movements spoke of decades of training, of battles fought, and one. You've got 10 hours, Cat said quietly. 10 hours to decide what kind of men you really want to be, because when General Steele arrives with the main force, there won't be any more decisions to make. Victor backed away, his previous bravado evaporating in the face of something he didn't understand, the unshakable calm of a woman who had faced far worse than midnight intimidation. Mount up, he barked to his men, trying to maintain control. This isn't over, old woman. No. Cat agreed, watching them scramble to their vehicles. It's just beginning. As the cartel members fled into the night, Hannah approached Cat, taking in the scene, the gathering veterans, the untouched flag, and the woman who stood beneath it, transformed from librarian to warrior before their eyes. Those men. Hannah nodded toward the veterans, now securing the A with military precision. They came awful fast. Been waiting a long time for my call. Hannah, some debts can never be repaid, some bonds never break. In the distance, more engines could be heard, more veterans arriving, drawn by a network of brotherhood that had laid dormant but never died above them. The flag moved gently in the night breeze. its stars and stripes unmarred by the flames that had threatened to claim it. Adrian Rodriguez sat in his SUV watching. Cat through the windshield as she coordinated with the arriving veterans for the first time. He saw what they'd all missed beneath the quiet exterior of a small-town librarian was a warrior who commanded respect not through fear, but through a lifetime of earned loyalty. The night was far from over, and Riverwood was about to learn what real strength looked like, not the false power of intimidation, but the unshakable force of men and women united by honor, duty, and debts that transcended time itself. The Los Zetas compound pulsed with nervous energy as Victor Reyes paced the worn floorboards of his office through tinted windows. He watched his men fortifying the perimeter. Their movements, lacking their usual confidence, the flag burning, had been meant to break the old woman's spirit. Instead, it had awakened something none of them understood. 40 vehicles just rolled into town, Marco, his security chief, reported. Bursting through the door, all veterans moving in formation, like some kind of military unit. Victor hurled his crystal whiskey glass against the wall. How did one phone call bring this many this fast? In the corner, Adrian worked on his laptop, his face illuminated by the screen blue glow. Boss, you don't understand what we're dealing with. Catherine Winters isn't just some veteran. He turned the screen toward Victor. 3 distinguished flying crosses, 2 silver stars left. LED, one of the most successful medical evacuation units in Vietnam. They called her the ghost Angel of Saigon. Why? Victor demanded his composure. Cracking, she specialized in impossible rescues, flew into hot zones no one else would touch. There's a mission report here. Adrian scrolled through declassified documents. She flew through the heaviest anti-aircraft fire ever recorded in the war to save a surrounded platoon. Everyone said it was suicide. She went anywhere. Ways saved 20 men that day. Marco, who'd been quiet until now, cleared his throat. My T.O. was in Vietnam, used to talk about a pilot who pulled. We're dealing with Catherine Winters isn't just some veteran. He turned the screen toward Victor. 3 distinguished flying crosses, 2 silver stars left. LED, one of the most successful medical evacuation units in Vietnam. They called her the ghost Angel of Saigon. Why? Victor demanded his composure. Cracking, she specialized in impossible rescues, flew into hot zones no one else would touch. There's a mission report here. Adrian scrolled through declassified documents. She flew through the heaviest anti-aircraft fire ever recorded in the war to save a surrounded platoon. Everyone said it was suicide. She went anywhere. Ways saved 20 men that day. Marco, who'd been quiet until now, cleared his throat. My T.O. was in Vietnam, used to talk about a pilot who pulled his entire unit out under heavy fire, said she flew through hell itself to save them. That's not the worst part. Adrian continued. The general she called Thomas Steele. He runs the largest veteran network in 3 states. These aren't just old soldiers, boss. They're organized, connected, and they've got chapters everywhere. Victor's face darkened as the implications sank, and they built their reputation on fear, on the assumption that their targets would always be weaker, more afraid. But now across town, Kat stood in front of her colonial home, directing arriving veterans with the same quiet authority she'd used in combat. Her house had become an impromptu command center with military precision, replacing domestic order. Rose McCarthy approached carrying coffee and sandwiches. Kat, you need to eat something. Been standing there for hours. Thanks. Rose, she took the coffee but waved off the food. Saw too many men miss important details because they were focused on their stomachs. A group of 3 vehicles rolled up, their drivers wearing combat veteran patches. The lead driver, a weathered man in his 60s, dismounted and approached Kat with military bearing. Master Sergeant James Cooper. Ma'am, General Steele sent us ahead. We're your advance recon. Kat nodded, recognizing the tactical move. Glad to have you, Sergeant Towns. About 4M Square. Zetas hold the north end compound behind the old lumber mill. M. Cooper pulled out a map, and other veterans gathered around as Kat detailed the situation. Their formations and responses were automatic, decades of training kicking in like they'd never left the service. Hannah Mitchell watched from her cruiser, amazement crossing her face as Riverwood transformed into something resembling a military operation. More veterans arrived every each group integrating seamlessly into the growing force inside McCarthy's diner, now serving as an unofficial briefing area. Rows serve coffee to a mix of townspeople and newly arrived veterans. The atmosphere had shifted from fear to cautious hope as stories were shared. I was there, an older veteran told. The gathered crowd outside Saigon 68, trapped behind enemy lines with no way out. Everyone said we were done for. Then this helicopter appears out of nowhere, flying through the heaviest fire I'd ever seen. Cat Winters pulled 20 of us out that day, never asked for anything in return, just said this is what sisters and brothers do. Similar stories spread through the diner as more veterans arrived, each carrying their own memory of the quiet librarian who'd saved lives, led impossible missions, and never sought recognition. A young veteran rushed into the diner, face flushed with excitement. You've got to see this. The highway's full of them. Must be 50 more vehicles heading this way. Outside, Kat stood with Cooper studying the town map. They'll try something before the main force arrives, she said quietly. Victor's pride won't let him wait. Let them try, Cooper replied grimly. We've got 30 years of combat experience surrounding that compound. These cartel boys want to play soldier. Let's show them what real soldiers look like. A veteran approached at a run-man movement at the compound. Looks like they're splitting up small groups, heading out different directions. Kat's eyes narrowed. They're probing our defenses, testing our response time. She turned to Cooper. Remember Hill 149? Same principal. Cooper grinned. Like riding a bike, ma'am. Never forget. He began issuing orders, veterans moving with practiced efficiency to counter the cartel's movements at the compound. Victor watched his scouts depart, trying to regain control of a situation spiraling beyond his understanding. Find their weak points, he ordered. These old-timers can't cover everything. Adrian shifted uncomfortably. Boss, maybe we should consider pulling back. Call and help from other cartels. We are the help. Victor exploded. We the ones people fear. I won't let some geriatric war relics take that away. But his words lacked their usual conviction. Through the window, he could see more veteran vehicles arriving, their formation perfect, their purpose clear. These weren't weekend warriors playing at being tough. These were men and women who'd faced real combat, real death, and had emerged stronger. In her home office, Kat looked at the old photograph. Again, the faces of her unit stared back. Young men and women who'd learned the true meaning of brotherhood. In the crucible of war, the satellite phone rang. Still checking, and how's it looking, Kat? Like old times, Thomas. They're testing us, looking for weakness, just like the VC at Con. Remember what you told me that night about the difference between soldiers and warriors? Kat smiled slightly. Soldiers fight because they have to. Warriors fight because they understand why they have to. We're 3 hours out, 300 strong. Can you hold? Kat watched through her window as veterans moved with practiced precision, securing positions, establishing communications, transforming Riverwood into a fortress. Oh, will hold. These boys are about to learn the difference between intimidation and real strength. Riverwood held its breath as midnight approached. The cartel's first probe came from the east, 5 black SUVs running dark, trying to slip through the veterans' perimeter. They made it 3 blocks before finding their path blocked by parked trucks, arranged with military precision. As they turned to find another route, more vehicles moved silently into position. Behind them, like fish in a barrel, Cooper muttered into his radio, watching from his elevated position. Just like you said, Kat, they're thinking like thugs, not soldiers. Kat's voice crackled back, calm as ever. Pride makes men predictable. How many? 5 vehicles, 12 men looking real nervous now that they realized their box in the trapped cartel members gathered in a tight circle, their hushed arguments carrying clearly in the night air. Hey, this was a mistake, one hissed to their leader. These aren't normal folk. We're dealing with their playing chess while we're playing checkers. Before his companion could respond, bright lights suddenly flooded the street from all directions. The cartel members found themselves illuminated from every angle, while their observers remained hidden in darkness. Gentlemen, Cooper's voice cut through the night, carrying the unmistakable tone of military command. I suggest you consider your next move very carefully. At the Zeta compound, Victor paced nervously as he waited for reports. The radio crackled with his trapped men's voices, the fear evident even Through the static, they've got us surrounded, boss. These veterans, they're moving like a. Darkness, gentlemen, Cooper's voice cut through the night, carrying the unmistakable tone of military command. I suggest you consider your next move very carefully. At the Zeta compound, Victor paced nervously as he waited for reports. The radio crackled with his trapped men's voices, the fear evident even. Through the static, they've got us surrounded, boss. These veterans, they're moving like a. Real military unit. Adrian watched Victor's face darken. We should pull everyone back, he suggested quietly. Regroup while we can shut up. Victor hurled a chair across the room. I won't let some old-timers make us look weak. Too late for that, Marco muttered, earning a murderous glare from Victor across town. At Kat's house now, serving as the command center, she coordinated the veterans' movements with the same quiet efficiency she'd used in Vietnam. The living room had transformed into a tactical operations center with maps and communication equipment covering every surface. Echo team reports movement from the north of veteran radio. Operator announced larger group this time, maybe 15 vehicles. Kat studied the map, her mind calculating angles and options there. Getting desperate, trying to overwhelm one section of our perimeter, she keyed her radio. All units, be advised, main thrust coming from the north, but watch your flanks. This is probably a diversion. Rose entered, carrying fresh coffee, her eyes widening at the sophistication of the operation. Cat half the town's gathered at my diner. They want to know what's happening. Tell them to stay inside, Cat replied without looking up from her map. This is about to get complicated, as if confirming her words. The sound of engines roared from the north, but these weren't the stealthy approaches of before. This was a full-on charge. The cartel apparently abandoning subtlety for brute force here. They come. Cooper's voice crackled over the radio. 15 vehicles, moving fast, no tactical formation, just raw speed, just like we planned. Kat's voice remained steady. Let them through. The first line, the charging cartel vehicles roared past the first veteran positions, their whoops of triumph dying in their throats as they realized they were being channeled, not evading. Steel cables suddenly pulled Todd across side streets, forcing them down a predetermined path. Now Cat commanded veterans emerge from doorways and alleys, moving with coordinated precision. Police cars appeared at intersections, lights flashing within. Moments the cartel's charge had been contained in a 4-block area, completely surrounded. What the hell is this? One of the trapped cartel members demanded. This Cat's voice carried clearly as she stepped into view is what real tactical planning looks like. The old veteran stood calmly in the street, surrounded by men and women who moved with the deadly grace of trained soldiers. The contrast between their disciplined presence and the cartel's chaotic charge couldn't have been clearer. Last chance, Cat announced. Surrender your vehicles, walk away, no charges filed, no consequences. Continue this fight and you'll learn why they called us the ghost unit in Vietnam. One of the younger cartel members, barely 20, suddenly gunned his engine and charged directly at Cat. Before anyone could react, 3 veterans moved in perfect coordination. The vehicle's front wheel was swept out. Its driver expert detained the entire incident over in seconds. That's one choice, Cat commented mildly. Anyone else want to try their luck against men and women who've spent decades perfecting the art of combat? Back at the compound, Victor listened to his men's radio calls with growing desperation. Fall back, he screamed into the radio. Everyone fall back. But it was too late. The veterans had predicted this too, cutting off escape routes with the same military precision that had trapped them. One by one, cartel members found themselves facing a choice: surrender or escalate against opponents who clearly outmatched them. Boss Marco's voice shook slightly. We've lost contact with the North team. These E-teams surrounded this. This isn't working. Adrian watched Victor's world crumbling. He'd built his power on fear and intimidation, but these veterans seemed immune to both, where they were systematically dismantling the cartel's reputation with each perfectly executed maneuver in McCarthy's diner towns. People watched through windows as the veterans efficiently contained the cartel's attempted show of force. Hannah Mitchell stood with Rose and others, amazement on their faces. My God, Rose whispered, look at them move like they've been doing this together for years. They have, Hannah replied, watching with professional appreciation, just not here, not recently, but some. Skills you never forget. Kat's voice came over the radio again, addressing the surrounded cartel. Members, General Steele's main force is 2 hours out. When they arrive, this ends one way or another. Choice is yours. How it ends, the trapped cartel members looked at each other, their usual bravado replaced by uncertainty. They were used to being the predators, not the prey now. They found themselves caught in a trap laid by men and women who learned their trade in the hardest school imaginable. Adrian watched from his hidden position as more cartel members surrendered. The clatter of weapons hitting pavement, spreading like falling dominoes. As he observed Kat directing the operation, he finally understood what they'd missed about her. This wasn't just an old woman who'd served in a war. This was a legend who'd never stopped being a warrior. The night's first engagement was ending, but Adrian knew it was just the beginning. Vic's pride would demand retaliation, but for the first time, Adrian wondered if he was on the wrong side of history. The quiet librarian had just shown them what real power looked like. Not the power of fear, but the power of discipline, strength, and unbreakable bonds. Dawn's first light crept over Riverwood as veterans processed the captured cartel members. Cooper supervised the operation with military efficiency, cataloging seized weapons and vehicles, while Mitchell handled the legal documentation. The night's engagement had yielded more than just prisoners. It had shattered the cartel's aura of invincibility. 28 captured, 6 vehicles impounded. Cooper reported to CAD at the command center. Most of them are young, scared, never faced real opposition. Before Kat stood at the operations map, marking updated positions with the same precision she'd used plotting rescue missions in Vietnam, and the others 5 escaped back to the compound, including Victor's Lieutenant Marco in McCarthy's diner, now serving as a support hub. Rose and other towns people provided coffee and food to the veterans while sharing information about cartel movements. The fear that had paralyzed the town for months was being replaced by something else hope never seen anything like it. An elderly resident told the gathered crowd they moved, they worked together like watching a dance they'd practiced their whole lives. A veteran at the counter smiled. That's because we have some things you never forget. At the cartel compound, Victor's rage filled the command room like poison. Gas maps and papers littered the floor, casualties of his latest outburst. How he demanded of no one in particular. How did they predict every move? Adrian stood in the corner, his decision crystallizing with each passing moment. Because they've done this before, he said quietly, not against cartels, against armies. What did you say? Victor's voice dropped. Dangerously been doing more research on Kat Winters, found mission reports from same one she used evacuating surrounded units under heavy fire. She's not just fighting us, she's teaching them, training them to her standards. Marco nursed his wounded pride. And a cup of coffee. They're not just old veterans, they're her veterans, men and women who owe her their lives. You can't break that kind of loyalty with fear. Victor's hand slammed onto his desk. Then we break it with blood. Call our contacts in Mexico. I want professional soldiers. Heavy weapons will show them what real war looks like. But Adrian had stopped listening. Through the window, he watched more veteran vehicles arriving, their MOV movements coordinated and purposeful. His hand found his grandmother's rosary again, and he knew what he had to do. At the command center, Kat received an update from her forward observers. Cartels making calls. A young veteran reported lots of them to Mexico. Primarily, they're calling him professionals. Kat nodded. Good, makes our job easier. Cooper raised an eyebrow. How do you figure professionals know when they're outmatched? They calculate odds, not ego. Unlike Victor, they'll understand what they're really facing. Hannah Mitchell entered with fresh intelligence, just intercepted some calls. They're bringing in heavy weapons, military-grade stuff. This is escalating, Kat. It was always going to. Kat replied calmly, men like Victor don't know how to lose gracefully, but that's exactly what we're counting on. Outside, Adrian approached the veteran perimeter with his hands raised too. Veterans materialized from cover, moving with the smooth efficiency of longtime operators. I want to speak to Kat Winters, he said firmly. I have information she needs to hear. In McCarthy's diner. Rose watched through the window as Adrian was escorted to the command center. That's Victor's intelligence officer, she told. Hannah, what's he doing here? Choosing a side, Hannah replied softly. Finally, Kat met Adrian in what had once been her living room. Maps and communication equipment had transformed it into a military command post, but her calm presence remained unchanged as she gestured to a chair. Tell me why you're here. Adrian's words came in a rush. Victor's lost at ease. Calling in Los Zetas Special Forces, heavy weapons professional killers. But that's not the worst. Parties planning to target civilians, create chaos to split your forces. Kat's expression didn't change. Why are you telling me this? Because Adrian hesitated, then pulled out his grandmother's rosary. My Abia always said there are two kinds of strength, the kind that breaks things and the kind that builds them. I've been serving the wrong kind. A slight smile crossed Kat's face. Your grandmother sounds like a wise woman. She was like you, she never needed fear to earn respect. The satellite phone chirped, and Kat answered it with practiced deficiency. Go ahead, Thomas. 90 minutes out. General Steele's voice crackled through, getting reports from towns. We passed people lining the streets, watching us pass words spreading about what's happening in Riverwood. Good, Kat replied. Let them see. Let them understand. Stan, she turned back to Adrian. You understand what switching sides means? There's no going back. I understand. Adrian nodded. I've seen enough to know which side I want to be on when this ends. Outside, veterans continued fortifying positions as the morning sun climbed higher. Cooper coordinated with newly arrived units, integrating them into the defense with practiced ease. The contrast between their disciplined prepar and the cartel's chaos couldn't have been clearer. At the compound, Victor received confirmation that his reinforcements were en route. Professional killers, heavy weapons, everything he'd requested. But as he watched more veteran vehicles arrive through his binoculars, a cold feeling settled in his stomach. These weren't just old soldiers playing at war. They were warriors who never stopped being ready for battle. Boss Marco approached cautiously. Adrian's gone. Switch sides. Victor's laugh carried an edge of hysteria. Doesn't matter. When our people arrive, we'll show everyone what real power looks like. We'll burn this whole town if we have to. But even as he spoke, General Steele's force drew closer, 300 strong, moving with the precision of a military convoy. And in her command center, Kat Winters prepared for the next phase of an operation she'd been planning since the moment Victor first threatened her flag. The state age was set for a confrontation that would prove once and for all the difference between those who ruled through fear and those who led through respect, between those who broke things and those who built them, between those who fought for money and those who fought for something far more precious, honor, duty, and the unbreakable bonds of true warriors. The morning sun cast harsh shadows across Riverwood as three black helicopters appeared on the horizon. They flew low and fast, carrying Victor's reinforcements, Los Z's elite soldiers, and enough firepower to level a small town. Kat watched their approach from her command post, her expression unchanged, just like kissing. She murmured, they think overwhelming force is the answer. Adrian stood beside her, providing details about what was coming. 30 professional soldiers, former Mexican Special Forces, heavy weapons, including mounted machine guns and explosives. Good intel. Cooper nodded. But you're forgetting something important. What's that? They're fighting for money, Kat replied calmly. We're fighting for something else. The helicopters landed at the cartel compound, disgorging their cargo of men and weapons. Their commander, Colonel Santiago, carried himself with professional military, bearing a stark contrast of Victor's theatrical menace. Report Santiago demanded, studying the veteran positions through high-powered binoculars. Victor tried to assert authority. These old-timers have been not you. Santiago cut him off. He pointed to Marco. Marco swallowed hard. They've got every approach covered. Move like a military unit. Their commander. He hesitated. What about their commander? Catherine Winters, they called her the ghost Angel of Saigon, specialized in impossible rescues under heavy fire. Santiago's expression changed slightly. The ghost Angel, you're certain? Yes, sir, and she's got nearly 100 veterans with her already, more coming. Santiago lowered his binoculars slowly. You didn't tell me we were facing her. He said to Victor, this changes Things why Victor demanded they're just old soldiers no Santiago's voice carried. Decades of military experience, they're legends, and you've made them. Angry at the command center, Kat coordinated with her units as the cartel's professional soldiers began probing their defenses. Unlike the previous night's chaotic attacks, these were disciplined reconnaissance efforts. They're testing every sector Cooper reported, looking for weak points. Let them look, Kat replied. Adrian, tell them about the lumber mill. Approach. Adrian leaned over the map. They'll try to use it as a flanking route is what I would have suggested. Kat's smile carried echoes of countless jungle operations. Exactly so. That's where we set our trap. The cartel's first serious probe came at noon. A coordinated three-pronged attack meant to split the veteran forces. Santiago's men moved with professional precision, but they found themselves facing opponents who'd learned their trade in the world's harshest combat zones. Contact south of veteran radio. Operator announced 2 technicals with mounted weapons. East sector reports movement. Another called out infantry with support weapons. West approach clear. A third. Important what's that they're fighting for money, Kat replied calmly. We're fighting for something else. The helicopters landed at the cartel compound, disgorging their cargo of men and weapons. Their commander, Colonel Santiago, carried himself with professional military bearing. A stark contrast of Victor's theatrical menace. Reports Santiago demanded studying the veteran positions through high-powered binoculars. Victor tried to assert authority. These old-timers have been not you. Santiago cut him off and he pointed to Marco. Marco swallowed hard. They've got every approach covered. Move like a military unit. Their commander. He hesitated. What about their commander? Catherine Winters. They called her the Ghost Angel of Saigon, specialized in impossible rescues under heavy fire. Santiago's expression changed slightly. The Ghost Angel, you're certain? Yes, sir. And she's got nearly 100 veterans with her already, more coming. Santiago lowered his binoculars slowly. You didn't tell me we were facing her, he said to Victor. This changes things. Why Victor demanded they're just old soldiers no Santiago's voice carried. Decades of military experience, they're legends, and you've made them. Angry at the command center, Kat coordinated with her units as the cartel's professional soldiers began probing their defenses. Unlike the previous night's chaotic attacks, these were disciplined reconnaissance efforts. They're testing every sector Cooper reported, looking for weak points. Let them look, Kat replied. Adrian, tell them about the lumber mill. Approach. Adrian leaned over the map. They'll try to use it as a flanking route. It's what I would have suggested. Kat's smile carried echoes of countless jungle operations. Exactly so. That's where we set our trap. The cartel's first serious probe came at noon. A coordinated three-pronged attack meant to split the veteran forces. Santiago's men moved with professional precision, but they found themselves facing opponents who'd learned their trade in the world's harshest combat zones. Contact south of veteran radio. Operator announced 2 technicals with mounted weapons. East sector reports movement. Another called out infantry with support weapons. West approach clear. A third. Voice added 2 clear. Kat studied the pattern, seeing it with the same tactical eye that had saved countless lives in Vietnam. They're using the lumber mill route exactly as predicted. Cooper execute. Operation Rolling Thunder. The trap was sprung with devastating efficiency as Santiago's forces pushed through what they thought was a gap in the veteran lines. They found themselves caught in a perfectly orchestrated killbox, not with lethal force, but with the kind of tactical superiority that makes combat. Veterans surrender before blood is shed. Mother of God, one of Santiago. Sergeants breathed as veterans emerged from concealed positions. Their movements showing decades of training. These aren't retirees playing soldier. These are the real thing in McCarthy's Diner townspeople. Watch the operation unfold. Rose had never seen anything like it. The smooth coordination, the silent communication, the absolute confidence of people who'd faced far worse and prevailed. Look at Kat. Hannah whispered. She's not just fighting them, she's teaching them a lesson. Adrian proved his worth, repeatedly anticipating the cartel's tactics because he'd helped plan them. Each time Santiago's forces tried to implement a strategy, they found the veterans had already countered it. Impossible, Santiago muttered, watching another attack falter against prepared. Positions they know every move before we make it, because they've made them all before Adrian's voice came over there. Radio frequency in places where the stakes were higher and the enemy was stronger. Stand down, Colonel Yor. Fighting ghosts who learned their trade in hell itself. Santiago's professional soldiers began to hesitate, their confidence shaken by the realization that they were facing veterans of a different caliber. These weren't the usual local opposition. They steamrolled through fear and superior. Firepower. General Steele's force 30 minutes out. Cooper reported to Cat the sound of approaching vehicles had become a continuous rumble like distant thunder growing closer. Victor paced a compound frantically attack. Full force. They can't stop all of us, but Santiago held up his hand. Listen, he commanded quietly. The rumble was growing louder, and now they could see them, an endless line of vehicles stretching along the highway, all moving with military precision. Leading them was a massive black SUV with 3-star Jenner flags. My God, Santiago breathed. How many? 300. Adrian's voice came over the radio again. All combat veterans, all owing their lives to the woman whose flag you tried to burn. Cat's voice followed, calm as ever. Colonel Santiago, you've got 10 minutes to surrender your forces. After that, you'll face men and women who spent decades perfecting the art of war. Your choice. Santiago looked through his binoculars one last time, seeing not just the approaching force, but the absolute precision of the veterans already in position. He'd fought many battles, but he knew a losing fight. When he saw one stand down, he ordered his men, we're professionals, we know when we're outmatched. Victor grabbed his arm. You can't we have superior firepower? Santiago shook him off with professional disdain. Firepower means nothing against experience, against brotherhood, against. He gestured at the veterans' positions, against ghosts who never forgot how to fight. The morning's engagement had demonstrated something profound, the difference between those who fought for money and those who fought for something deeper, between those who relied on weapons and those who carried their strength in their unity and experience. As General Steele's force approached Riverwood, Cat Winters stood calmly in her command center, watching Santiago's men lay down their weapons. The cartel's professional soldiers had learned what Victor couldn't understand, that real power wasn't found in fear or firepower, but in the unshakable bonds of warriors who'd never forgotten what it meant to serve something greater than themselves. The ground seemed to vibrate as General Thomas Steele's convoy entered Riverwood, 300 vehicles moving in perfect formation. Leading them was Steele's black SUV, flanked by motorcycles driven by veterans who moved like they'd never left the service. The morning sun glinted off chrome and polished metal, creating an image of unstoppable force. Cat stood outside her command center, watching the arrival with the same calm she'd shown throughout the crisis. Cooper stood beside her, coordinating the integration of new forces into their defensive positions, just like old times. Cooper remarked, better odds in case. And Cat replied with a slight smile. Santiago and his disarmed men watched in professional awe as the convoy rolled past their position. Look at that precision, he murmured, like a military operation, not a civilian response, because that's exactly what it is. Adrian explained, now serving as liaison. These aren't just veterans. They're men and women who never stopped being soldiers. They just needed the right cause to remind them. The convoy lead vehicles reached Cat's position and stopped with military precision. General Steele emerged from his SUV, his bearings still parade ground perfect. Despite his age, for a moment, he and Cat just looked at each other. Decades of shared combat